Hey everybody, welcome to Not Another Tooling Podcast.
We got a name.
Finally thought of a name this time, so happy days. I'm Austin.
I'm Matt.
This is my wonderful co-host Matt, and today we are excited to talk about observability. If I don't get too distracted by Matt walking away on his very cool treadmill under his desk that I'm slightly jealous of, I might have to get one of those.
Just getting the steps in.
Matt, do you want to kick us off with some questions then?
Yeah, I suppose the very obvious one to begin with is what the hell is it?
Well, good. It's a really good question. And observability is a name that's been kicking around for probably a couple of years now, that a lot of the APM vendors kind of liked the look of, and Gartner has cottoned on, and they've now changed what was their APM Magic Quadrant is now called Observability and APM, but interestingly doesn't cover things like infrastructure and stuff. So as with the usual Gartner stuff, it kind of says observability, but you're not observing everything. So a bit of a crazy thing, but the whole general idea is that execs want to see what is happening in IT services and related business services. So tools are supposed to give you that ability to be able to observe what is happening in any business service that has underlying IT components, is the theory.
So, I mean, so what? What if I don't? What if I don't subscribe to it? What's the impact? What am I not getting? What can I do without?
I think it's a really interesting question because everyone I talk to at the moment has got observability on their agenda. And as we kind of mentioned last time on our podcast, is it the right question? So everybody wants to be able to see, and I was with the CEO of a global insurer recently who said, I want a dashboard on my wall so that I can see whether our systems that underpin our services to our customers are on or off. I want to be able to see what's going on. But the question is, do your customers care? Right now, if I'm going to get an insurance quote, do I care whether the dashboard or the IT people or whoever has got a dashboard on their wall that says, yeah, everything is green or red or whatever? I don't really. I would much rather, if something goes wrong, you fix it as quickly as possible than be able to say, okay, great, I can see we've got problems in our services. Now we can go and start to dig in and diagnose it. So me personally, I've got a bit of an issue with this kind of observability kind of phrase, I think. But I don't know what you think about that, Matt.
Well, I'm sort of thinking back to more traditional event management and essentially creating multiple views where you can see different components of different layers, have different levels of impacts and associated impacts. What's the difference really there from a functionality point of view? What's the extra gain other than a new badge?
So I think typically in most organizations, right, they've got a plethora of tools. Mm-hmm. And therefore they've got a load of different dashboards, and trying to bring those together into a single view so that you could say, for example, how is claims management service doing, has been quite hard traditionally, right? Because you've got your network dashboard and your server dashboard and your applications dashboard and all that sort of thing. So bringing it all together so that you can say, actually, the experience that my customer is getting is good right now, whereas previously it would have been really hard to work out whether the customer was getting a good experience or not, apart from something, fairly rudimentary, like can they access our web page and fill in all the forms within a certain amount of time, type approach. And I was thinking about a discussion I had with an online travel retailer a couple of years back, where they had exactly this problem, and their marketing director would go, "Oh, no, nobody's spending any money in the last half an hour. What's going on?" And you'd go to the CEO, and the CEO would go, "Right, IT, what's going on?" And they'd go, "Right, hang on a minute. Let's go look at this system and this system and this system and this system." They all look to be green, and that would take them an hour to work out, because it's fairly complex. And then they would go back and say, "No, it's not us." And then the CEO would go back to marketing, and marketing would go, "Oh yeah, actually, sorry, we switched the type of ads that we were showing to our customers 2 hours ago, and that's what slowed the traffic down. So we switched it back." And the IT department are going nuts in the meantime. And this would happen like on a weekly basis. And they had all these great tools, all the usual stuff, but they just didn't have that overall view of what's the experience our customers getting, and what do our services look like. I think so, which you and I would have called business service management back in the day.
I still use that terminology now. In fact, I'm writing a paper right now specifically talking about that terminology. I mean, what other terminology would you use at the moment for that? Because that's literally something I'm writing up now.
Well, I think really that observability is the new kind of phrase, because I think business service management, BSM, sort of, people got quite disillusioned with it when they were playing with all the big tool sets, 10 years ago, and trying to build this stuff, and it was so hard to do, that term is fairly negatively looked at, I think, in big enterprises, and they'd rather talk about observability now, because it's new and cool.
Change the word. It's always a hard thing to achieve, though, isn't it? I think that future, and we can probably speak to a couple of obvious vendors where they had a nice graphic of business service management, and you always think, okay, I need to fill in all of those boxes, but realistically most organizations are going to operate absolutely fine with a third, a half, 2/3, more than good enough. The sort of end goal of having that nirvana state of every single component or capability fulfilled, not really needed. Coming to the point of observability, and get my words out straight, I think the sort of notion there is we don't need those various individual views of various things, be it the network, the infrastructure, the app, or whatever else. It's the end-to-end view that's more important. It's was the customer able to execute this? If not, why? But those sort of things. So I think it's given that extra sort of, if you will, business context to an issue versus an outright, my techie thing's broken.
Yeah, and I think the real value, working on a project with a bank at the moment, where actually, because they've got those, that traditional siloed approach, when something goes wrong, how do you get it to the right resolver group? Because every resolver group, or in fact, probably a better example is outsourcers, right? You've got 5 outsourcers and internal IT and whatever. They're all just going, it's not me, because I don't want to take the service credits for mucking up the service. And this sort of observability or business service management will hopefully give people an end-to-end view and say, actually, it's that thing that's causing the problem. So I think there's some goodness in it, right? I just personally think, but in my dream world, I wouldn't want to see any dashboards at all. I just want to know that the system is doing its job, and that if we've got a problem with claims management, that it's worked out that it's a network problem, and it's already routed it to the network team, and they're working on it, is more important than being able to see that in and have people with dashboards. Oh, I need to have a look at that. Right, we need to dive in there. But maybe I'm dreaming.
The dashboard will never die. I mean, who doesn't want to look at a sea of beautiful green and then ultimately at some point a sea of red. Dashboards will always be around, I would say, for the most part. What we see on those dashboards, I think, is probably up for change, but we'll come back to that in a second. I suppose before, because I would want to know, I'm sure our listeners would want to know the practical steps of how to implement it, right? But before that point, what is the difference then between observability and AI ops?
Okay, nice question. So AI ops is really about applying some intelligence to that data that you're then displaying in your dashboard to be able to take action in an automated fashion. So that's observability, just seeing the stuff. AI ops is doing something about it, I would say. Although that's another one that we probably need a whole section on, because that's another one Gartner have done interesting things with over the years.
I'm sure we will as well. I think it's useful to raise. Okay, so what's practical then? I'm an old school outfit doing IT. I've got various old products, new products, an array of things which most people do. I now want to go down this track. What am I doing? How am I doing it? When am I doing it? Why?
Really, it's an interesting question, because I'd say the question that we don't ask enough is, what's going to be the outcome to you as a business, right? And we'll probably touch on this in every single podcast we talk about, we do, because it still drives me up the wall every meeting I have, where I walk in and they're like, yeah, we're going to do an observability project, and here's my 20 technical things that I need to prove out. And I go, okay, what's going to be the difference to your bank? Do we get to have these lovely dashboards? Brilliant, wonderful. Yep. But really what people are trying to get to is this single view of the truth, so that they can say, okay, we know whether our service is up or down. And a lot of people just don't know that. And in fact, I did a project with a telco last year. They had 18 different monitoring tools, and they live and die by their network. And they were in the process of being bought by an investment company. And the investment company said, well, can you tell whether your network's up or down? And they go, yeah, give us half an hour. We'll go and look at all these tools, and we'll put the output together in a spreadsheet. And they're like, this is your lifeblood. If you can't tell whether it's up or down. So, that's, I think, just getting clear on whether that's going to make a difference to your organization or not. And if so, whether there are particular areas of the business where this is an issue, or that are more important to solve this problem than others, has got to be the starting point, right? I.e., do you regularly have outages on your website, for example, which is where 90% of your revenue comes from, and therefore having a view of all the components that make up that particular service that builds your website in a single dashboard, and therefore being able to tell whether it's up or down, is, if that's going to make a difference and impact the revenue that you're bringing in, that sounds like a good place to start, rather than, okay, we want to buy observability across our organization, and then you end up buying it for test and dev and nobody cares.
So let's assume then, I've been to the seminar, I've heard the buzzword, I want to implement it, I've got my so what, that business justification, that expected outcome. I've got this stack of things on the shelf already. How am I taking the next step? How am I going from this thought I got in the seminar to actually turning my current estate, mixture of stuff, into that outcome? What's that transition look like?
So there's a couple of approaches out there, right? So there are some tools out there that you could put on top of what you've already got, that would ingest data from your existing tools and try and make sense of those, something akin to what ServiceNow's ITOM event management would try and do. as an example.
Other vendors do exist.
Plenty of other vendors do exist. Yeah, there are loads of them out there. Which is an example that everyone's probably heard of. Or there's the approach of having a look and saying, do we want to replace our existing or some of our existing tools with something that might give us that view with less tools? Me personally, I'm a fan of less tools to do the job. But actually in some big complex environments, it's so hard to take out tools that have been there for years and years that sometimes the view is it's easier to put something on top. But it's going to be one or the other, I guess. Does it really matter as long as you get to the outcome that you promise to the business, right?
I suppose it does matter to a degree, because it's the pain of the process to get to that end goal. And I'm with you on the limitation of the velocity of tools. Why would you have more unnecessarily? And I think from a simplistic point of view, adding that layer above, it gives you a bit of elbow room. You don't necessarily need to jump in and switch out all of the other stuff, which in itself could probably cause you some issues over time. If you have that layer above, and let's pretend, it's a reality, that layer above also has the capability of several of the underpinning components. That's probably a smarter position to be in, because if you can add that layer above, call it that visibility layer, that event view, whatever you want to call it, the correlation of all of those things, but it also in itself has a capability to perform this thing, you can almost tease yourself into fully adopting that new solution, whatever it might be. On the basis you can slowly replace things underpinning with the overarching solution that's looking at everything. That would be a nice scenario, and I think a practical project approach. Otherwise, what you got, a big bang scenario where you've got just creating more noise. So it's almost like the best of both worlds, but you'd want to be finding something which you probably wouldn't want something which just lands in there to achieve that immediate function. You want it to be able to have a roadmap in itself, so you can start to simplify your estate. But I would see that would be a logical project approach.
Yeah, when you find that, let me know.
Well, I mean,
I don't think there is. I genuinely haven't seen anything that's that good yet. I've seen a couple of bits that are okay at going on top of stuff. And I've seen lots of, well, not lots, there's not that many that could replace a lot of the stuff, so it's kind of one or the other. But the ones that go over the top don't typically then go collect the data, they're just aggregating data. My view would be, is that data good enough to give you the view that you need in your business? Most of the time I'd say it probably isn't, but you might be lucky that you've spent a fortune over the years and you've got an enormous amount of people who really know the tools and have got the best out of them, and therefore you can take that approach. But as you know, and you're a bit of an expert in, most of the time those tools have been sat there and underinvested in, therefore putting a layer on top of those really just highlights more mess and doesn't always give you generally doesn't give you what you need, I don't think.
Okay, so we've gone through the project, however we've got there.
Yep.
We've answered our so what. We're really going towards the future now and making sure this was the logical and I guess financial thing to do. Yep. Now what? I've implemented, it's up and running. I can see everything. So what? Now what?
And I'd be interested in your views on this, because you might have a different approach, right? Where I tend to always suggest customers go back to is, okay, let's go and have a look now at what's happened in your incidents in the last 6 months, 3 months, whatever, since you implemented this tool. Where's the next problems that you can go solve? And because the incident data never lies, right? When we go talk to a customer, they go, we really need this thing over here because storage was on fire last week or whatever. And then when you go and look in their incidents, you go, well, that's fine, but you've only had 3 storage outages in the last year, and you've had 200 Windows disk full errors in the last 2 days. Which problem do you really want to fix? And tend to find that's a really good way for customers to work out the what's next, is to go look at the data. But what do you see?
I was going to come to one of the comments you just made there, which is a really good comment, and one which is truthful more recently, is the incident data doesn't lie. So there was a scenario where, I say scenario, it's a real scenario, where there is a degree of service reporting, and of this service reporting, there is a sea of green. Now, there are various monitoring solutions looking at that underlying sea of green, and occasionally turns red. So the conversation was, monitoring tools turning red. Can you guys see what the problem is with the monitoring tool? Because I'm getting the reports for the service, and the service is green. The service isn't green because it's manufactured data. So coming to your point, which I think is a really, if you're going to create a new IT monitoring type product solution company, you know, the incident doesn't lie or something like that would be a nice badge, because that is so factual. It's real data. It's like a discovery solution. It's seeing what's actually there. But often you get challenged on what it's bringing back, but it's very transparent. It's telling you what it's getting, how it's getting it, when it got it, how much of it, how much took place before. But to come to your answer your question, so I was pretty much following you down the path, but I think your last sort of sentence or two summarised it best. It's now seeing that data and seeing what's next. Now, you looked at it from a problem perspective, as in, I would imagine, more so from a, I think you fell off the treadmill then, more so from a IT problem type. Where I'm seeing a lot of actual good impact lately is then looking at the traditional IT noise and looking at how it can be applied from a business point of view, a financial point of view, an operational point of view. We're looking at the same information from a different lens. And I think the notion of implementing that layer above, however it's manufactured, and having that visibility now, it's now for me turning the IT suite into the business service management suite, not to mix with our earlier terminology of that, but turning it to a different lens and different people to consume it for other purposes. And whether that was purely a financial activity or we're trying to understand the potential downstream impact of this, that's where I'd see the benefit of the next steps, is doing more with the information and looking at it from a different lens.
That is a great shout. And you know, one of the things that is obviously a really hot topic now as we move into a period of austerity, shall we call it, going forward, is how do we use this stuff to take cost out? And maybe that would be a really good topic to talk about on our next podcast. As we are pretty much done with today's, I think.
Yeah.
And using that data is a really good start. So yeah, wonderful. Right, so we've talked about observability today. What is it? How is it different to AI ops? So observability, seeing, AI ops, taking action on. Where would you start? Identifying some real business services that are critical to the business, that have had issues that you want to start with, rather than going with a blanket approach. Going and taking an approach of either putting a tool on top of what you've got or replacing some existing tools, depending on your use case. And then out the back of that, when you've had your successful project, looking at what data you've got to from your incidents and from your events, to be able to look at what's the next project. Have I forgotten anything?
Sounds pretty good to me.
Awesome. Wonderful. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of Not Another Tooling podcast.
Now with a name.
Yeah. How many steps did you do on our podcast this week?
That's
Matt?
what I'm just looking at. Now. Not too many. 2,000.
2,000. Not bad. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
See you in a bit. Bye.
Bye.